Homelessness is a housing problem. Homelessness is solvable. Invest in housing. Solve the housing crisis, solve homelessness.
Look at it as a community-wide system.
Right. Well, I was hired to build the first plan to end homelessness in Canada, which came from the United States. We are seeing a wave of new homelessness in Canada like I don't think we've seen. Upwards of 300,000 different people will experience homelessness in a year. The solution becomes apparent through a conversation most of the time. We need to give cities some help to figure out how to do it.
We're interviewing Tim Richter, who's the CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I adore Tim. I consider the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness one of the leaders, if not the leader, in lived experience programming. And I've been honored to work with them to start their lived experience programming right from the start. There is a lot of similarities between Canadian homelessness and Australian homelessness and sleeping rough in the UK and homelessness in the United States. We're committed to bringing different voices and different leaders for all of us to help learn how to prevent and solve homelessness.
So here we are.
Here we are.
Canada. I haven't been north since COVID.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you back up here.
Well, thank you. I know I was trying to go out to rural Canada, and it just never happened because COVID hit. I lived, 4 hours away from here. I spent quite a bit of time up here.
Yeah.
Drove 24 cities. What's changed?
Well, you did your road trip in what, 2011?
2011.
Yeah, 2011. Between 2009 and 2019, a lot of cities in Canada were making progress, right? Like Edmonton, you visited Edmonton, they cut homelessness by half. Right. And, really, we were starting to get some success. The movement at homelessness was growing.
Medicine Hat was, if I remember, was...
Yeah, they were doing well. And we had a number of communities starting to achieve reductions in chronic and veteran homelessness. But then, 2020 hit. The pandemic, and it was like a light went off. Since February 2020, we see more and more people outside now. At the end, just like in the States, at the end of the pandemic, we also had a cost of living crisis. Unlike the United States through the pandemic, we didn't see the same kind of federal action on homelessness. So we saw a lot more people losing their housing during the pandemic, losing their jobs, losing their homes. But then the cost of living crisis hit, and it has been really something else. It is so tragic. We are seeing a wave of new homelessness in Canada like I don't think we've seen before. And so we think maybe upwards of 300,000 different people will experience homelessness in a year. And it's really something else. And what we're seeing today is a lot more people who are sicker. The pandemic, and that forced a lot more people outside for a range of reasons, same as the United States. But the housing crisis hit a global pandemic, which then in Canada was also hit with a toxic drug supply. And so we're seeing a lot of people on the streets in Canada who are really, really unwell. We're seeing a lot of things like acquired brain injury from repeat overdose on a toxic drug supply. On the flip side, on the upside is, we've had a lot more federal government engagement. We've got more engagement on housing intervention, housing policy. We've been much more active at the Canadian Alliance on lobbying the federal government on housing policy change and have had some success, but that's going to take time. And every day that takes, there's more people losing their home. And I get near the end of the month, every month, and I just am filled with dread because I just know that there's going to be people evicted.
This work has never been easy, but it's getting harder.
Yeah.
And it's getting harder to hold on to hope. What was the number, like you're saying 300,000 now, what was it 10 years ago? Do you remember? We
don't really know, but it was, because Canada's never done a great job of measuring these things. It would have been south of 200,000 a year. And it kind of grew, and then we're starting, we think, to recede. But, I want to get back to your earlier point about it being really hard right now. And I was really struck by your interview with Jeff Olivet when he talked about that. Yeah, he made a lot of sense when he's equating the movement to end homelessness with other social justice movements. And I thought, if you are an advocate for marriage equity, if you're a, civil rights leader, or if you are, in any of these social justice movements, you must have thought, there's just no way this is ever going to turn around. Like, I'm sure there's people say you're never going to have equal marriage. You're never going to have civil rights. You're never going to have voting rights, all those things. And that really struck me because we're in those days. We're in those days now, I think, in our movement where it's got to be really hard for some people to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's actually the job of people like me in the Alliance, is to keep that ember alive when things really feel like shit.
I get criticized a lot, and maybe some of it is just, but a lot of people say I'm always negative. I'm always being critical. When we started this podcast, I intentionally asked Jeff to talk about how we can give people hope. And I'm going to do a little spoiler here because you have me speaking. This will air after, so you know what I mean?
If you like this podcast or any of our content, documentary films, daily news articles on homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate and give a gift of any size. Our work has never been more important, and we cannot continue without your help.
I was at Morehouse, which is a university in Atlanta, and they were playing 3 of our films. So a lot of it has changed since Invisible People. Because when you met me, it was just me and a camera, right? Yeah. Now we have a crew. They were playing 3 of our films. And I was in town for a journalism conference, and I decided to go and sit and watch a couple films in the film festival. And they played a film on the Hillsborough Marchers. And these moms marched for 2 years in Ohio. For 2 years, rain, snow, a white school, because the children weren't allowed in. When would you have given up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and, you know, they started the peaceful movement. Martin Luther King got the march idea from them. And it takes an interesting personality that's going to stick through that. And that, I mean, the Hillsborough's marchers really stuck to me because it was mom and kids. And their employers were saying, you know, because many of them worked as maids, and they're saying, if you keep marching, go find a new job. I mean, and some of them had to stop marching because of that. Here we are working to prevent and solve homelessness, and homelessness is growing. And now you have more division in the government. I assume same up here as we have. How do you hold on to hope?
Actually, I think back to, you know, your videos. You have to look for reasons to hope. You got to look for those things that to be hopeful about, right? Like, I think about those people in your videos, right? The one that you shot and just put on today from a woman in Ottawa. And I sent that around to my team. I said, that's why we're doing this, right? She's why we're doing this stuff, right? And so part of it is we can't quit. But the other is knowing, on the other hand, you see reasons for hope, right? Thousands of people are being lifted out of homelessness in Canada every year.
We know how to end it.
Look at City of Toronto, right? So the City of Toronto's got 10,000 people or so in their shelter system. The City of Toronto is able to house 1,000 people every month. 1,000 people every month out of the shelter system. But 1,050 come in. And a big aha moment for us is understanding that this is structural, right? This is, you got to fix the housing system to fix homelessness, right? And that takes time. To get back to your point, like we gotta find a way to hold out hope. We have to be determined. There's no silver bullets, right? There's no magic solutions. There's no 20-step plan to ending homelessness, right? It's just continuous. Try new things, right? Just keep trying. I've often joked that, you know, I've done more wrong than right, but I've done enough right to make progress, right? You just keep failing forward to keep trying.
Well, we've known each other for 15 years. You really understood Invisible People. In fact, you once wrote an email. I kind of still use it today, where basically Invisible People content really helps build empathy in people. Unlike others, right? It's because it's so real and raw. And you saw it before anybody else, right? Even today, you're sending the content to your staff. That's real. I doubt any other CEO in the homeless sector or leader in the homeless sector is doing that right now. I mean, I know hospitals and even a city and even some police and mental health, they use the videos for training, but not homeless services.
Maybe it's because I came into the work in ending homelessness unencumbered by any experience. Like I came in from the private sector. I was, we were joking about earlier, I'm a recovering lobbyist. I came in because I was charged with building Calgary's plan to end homelessness, right? And so I started meeting with agency leaders and experts. It wasn't until I met with people who were homeless and started watching your videos that I had this aha moment and met Sam Simbaris. We talked about housing first, and he said, the key to housing first is asking people what they want, putting people back in the driver's seat of their own lives, giving them agency, right? Giving them choice, right? Letting them choose what they want. And I thought, well, wait a second. Isn't that at the heart of the private market? Right? Like if my kids decided green cornflakes were the thing,
Right.
you would have green cornflakes in a heartbeat because the system is watching for them, right?
Right.
Same with, user-centered design and technology,
Right.
right? Apple does it.
Yeah.
Well, why would homeless services be any different? Why don't we, because the users have no power.
They have no power. They don't buy stuff. Congresswoman Judy Cho, when we're in her office, came out and said, the problem is homeless people don't vote.
Right.
And then she listed all these other, whether it be LGBT or seniors, they vote. They have voting power. Well, I've always wondered, how do we fix that?
Right.
I worked on a political campaign in Los Angeles, and we have 9 mega shelters with 1,000 people in each one every night. Bus them to the polls.
Yeah.
Or, that's 9,000 votes, and nobody wanted to do that. So it's not only homeless people don't vote, we don't help them have a voice.
Yes. This is exactly the point, because we've allowed people experiencing homelessness to be marginalized. Governments will only do what there is support for, or they're going to get raked over the coals for. Like somebody, in politics recently said to me, well, politicians work on 2 stimuli, pain or pleasure. Either one of those will work to get them to move, right? And ultimately, this is about policy. Right? Homelessness isn't caused by addiction. It's not caused by mental illness. It's not caused by bad choices. It's caused by housing policy and poverty. So if you want to fix homelessness, we got to fix the policy. One of the things I think we can do is build political power. 35% of Canadians have either experienced homelessness themselves or know somebody who has. Right? 1.6 million Canadians have experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. What if we mobilized even a part of that? Like federal governments get elected on 30% of the voting public. We can capture that. Like there's new technology, there's new digital ways. Like you're a master of this stuff with YouTube. Everybody's getting their news off of YouTube, right? My kids included, right? So, me, right? And so can we use these digital tools? That's what the Alliance is doing. Well, that's one of the big areas of focus. We're going to, help communities do housing first. We're going to build community systems, but most importantly, we're going to build political power for our movement. We're going to build a movement that is going to move the public. And we're in a moment in Canada right now where everybody's feeling the housing crisis. I don't even have to convince people that we have a housing crisis, right? So now, how do we take advantage of that? But most importantly, build political power for those people and with those people who are experiencing homelessness, right? And that gets right back to where your videos come in, right? These are normal, decent, everyday people who've been forced to the streets, people who are hurting. Most everyday Canadian just knows that's not right.
Yeah.
Right? All the polling in the world tells us that's not right.
Right.
We got to find a way to capture them, convince them, and get them to vote on that.
Right.
Which is, I think we can do that.
We think like nonprofits. We need to think like brands.
Right.
So you're familiar with Santa Claus, right?
Yeah.
Santa Claus was a little green elf used for unions until Coca-Cola came around and used him in a marketing campaign. So now he's fat, red, eats cookies, that's all marketing.
Yeah.
Changed culture.
Exactly.
So when you ask a partner to get married, engaged, in the United States, it's 3 months salary, diamond ring. But back in the 1930s, you gave any kind of rock. You didn't have to give. And De Beers diamonds changed culture through a marketing campaign.
Exactly.
So then to diamonds, and then in the 80s, they changed it to 2 months salary, and now it's 3 months salary because with inflation, they want to make more profit. And the biggest one is recycling.
Yeah.
Because only 5% of plastic actually is recycled.
Right.
And it's a marketing campaign from oil and the plastic industry to fool us.
Right.
And it worked. We all recycle, right? Yeah. So why don't we use that thinking as nonprofits instead of saying, oh, we're going to, do this advocacy and do this other thing. No, go big, change the world, change culture, think differently.
And who would have thought 20 years ago marriage equity would be a thing?
Exactly.
Who would have thought civil rights would have been a thing in the 1930s in the United States, right?
Right.
You put those two things together, absolutely.
Yeah,
There's
we can
no
change
reason.
those.
There is no reason why we can't have that kind of campaign in Canada. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to do.
What would you say are the differences and similarities to Canadian and American homelessness? And I'm talking more about, the policies and politics and, the criminalization, which I see is happening here too.
I don't actually think there's a hell of a lot of difference, to be honest. I mean, yes, there's the demographic differences. There's differences in the way the U.S. is structured and the politics are a little different. But the trends that we see in the United States eventually come to Canada, right? So I was hired to build the first plan to end homelessness in Canada, which came from the United States. And I was hired to, begin implementing housing first.
I forgot about that.
But you think about it this way, like we saw in Alberta, we saw a problem getting worse despite our best efforts. And we saw somewhere was getting success across the United States using housing first and using plans to end homelessness. So we said, well, let's do that.
Right.
This is the thing about homelessness that I find both exciting and frustrating, because there's actually nothing new we need to do, right? We know how to do it. Go look at Finland, go look at the UK, go look at Australia, go look anywhere in the United States. There's how we do it. That's known, right? It's how we put it together and learning. Well, I've really benefited from the United States, right? If you look at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, it's kind of like the love child of the National Alliance to End Homelessness and Community Solutions, right? Throw in things we've picked up from training and technical assistance organizations in the States and campaign organizations like Andrew Burns that leads our marketing team now, our campaign team. He helped run Jacinda Ardern's election in New Zealand. Yeah. Like we just bring all of the best stuff around. So in many ways, I've really benefited because I can steal all of the best ideas from the Americans and adapt them to here. Plus, I can avoid all your mistakes, right? But we also, in all seriousness, one of the things that's really challenging in Canada right now is this mega virus of criminalization and politicization of homelessness that is so dangerous because mayors and cities are overwhelmed and they hear, oh, well, if we just force these people into treatment, we'll fix this problem. Some fella from California comes up and does a speech in Alberta or BC, and suddenly some politicians start thinking, well, you know what, that Schellenberger fella, he's got to figure out, well, we'll just force them into treatment. We'll arrest our way out of this problem, right? And so now we've got to find a way to put out those fires.
I visited a managed alcohol program today.
Yeah.
The people in California, part of the people you're talking about, helped shut down a managed alcohol program in California and San Francisco. This one has been running for many, many years. Yeah. And it always blows my mind. People that are supporting recovery, supporting treatment first, are so against harm reduction. But the people that support harm reduction support recovery, support abstinence-based, because we know it all is needed. It all works, and people are different. They bitch about seeing homeless people outside drinking or using drugs, and then they bitch about people inside drinking and using drugs out of sight, getting better, right? Yeah. They're just using it as a political ploy for a hidden agenda.
Yeah.
And that is what's so frustrating.
Well, and it's, I also want to give some mayors and others the benefit of the doubt, right? Because in some ways, they see a problem getting worse, and whatever it is we were doing before then, obviously obviously isn't working, right? So they're looking for a solution. They're looking for a silver bullet. They notice that people experiencing homelessness are, actively using, or they're suffering a mental illness or whatever. So they think, well, that must be the cause. They're solving the wrong problem. There's more people who are overdosing in housing than are overdosing on the street. Those people in housing aren't going to be forced into treatment. It's the people on the street. So the issue...
Do you have the treatment facilities?
No, God, no.
Right. So it's the same thing in America, right?
Well, where are you going to force them into? Yeah,
right.
exactly.
There's a Prop 36 that will probably pass. It's called the Homelessness, Drug, and Theft Proposition, and just by the name. And all it does is criminalize. It does not provide any funding or support for shelters or treatment or housing. Nothing. Right. Nothing at all. It just criminalizes people. Yeah. And they're like, well, we have to force these people to get better. Yeah. Ian says something that just sticks to my head is recovery works best when people want to recover. In America, you have the right-wing movement pushing it, but we're also seeing like Gavin Newsom and Democrats also pushing it. And I think it's short-sighted thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, on politicians. And this is my belief that people are smart, right? That could be proven wrong. Yeah. But they know that criminalization is only going to make it worse. But they're like, I'm not going to be around here in 2 or 3 years. Right. So, boom, let's...
And some of that's on us as a sector. Right? A lot of that's on us as a sector to say, we could see encampments getting worse. We could see the toxic drug supply getting worse. We got into these goofy debates, but harm reduction versus treatment. It's not either or, they're both and.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Like, we know this is a housing problem, but we didn't respond fast enough with the housing solution or collectively. Yeah. That's my, my long woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? Yeah. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, oh God, encampments are going to become worse. And that's going to create a bunch of pressure because homelessness will be in your face. We need to come back. Right. We need to help cities do the right thing. Newsom, other politicians are responding the way they are in the absence of any other options. He'll be challenged with the fact that, he went all in on housing first, he went all in on harm reduction, and for whatever reason that didn't work out, probably because it wasn't done well. It's a housing problem. Yeah. Right? Houston, tons of success because they fixed the housing issue. In the absence of a better option, that's where they go. And so, part of our work is staying ahead, moving faster, and creating better options for people.
I believe you're spot on. In one of our podcasts, we're talking to Mari, who's very much connected to policy in California, housing policy, homeless policy. And she said, the politicians that she talks to, the constituents call and all they have available is police, because if they call the outreach worker or the nonprofit, maybe in 7 days, maybe in a couple of weeks, the outreach worker will show up, and the best they can do is put them on a waiting list. Right. The constituents want action now, so police is their only recourse, if you would. Right. I mean, there are other options, but that's the one that they can do immediately. It's to flip the switch and send the police. We have to change that. But it's at the same time, people will always scream, well, we need more money. We can't change that. And it's always the same thing. You're right, which is probably a good segue, because you're doing this encampment. Yeah. What is it called?
Encampment response service.
I believe strongly. I see this in marketing and I see this in nonprofits. Everyone's overwhelmed. People need help, or they need some kind of support, or they might want to go in a direction, but they're just overwhelmed. And you could give them a training, you could give them a webinar, you could do all this stuff. But no, you are now doing a encampment response that does all the heavy lifting for them.
Yeah, well, and it allows us to tailor it to what they need. And this, again, comes back to something we were talking about a minute ago, right? I talk to mayors all the time. And I had one call me and said, I just have this problem. I need help to fix this, right? I talked to another mayor of a fairly big Canadian city who will remain nameless, but he told me, he says, look, I've got these guidelines. And he showed me the piece of paper about, implementing the right to housing for people living in encampments. And he said, I want to do it. 2 weeks later, his police service forced people out of an encampment downtown. The challenge was he wants wanted to do the right thing, but didn't know how. Right? Needs just to walk through that process. And so we're really lucky that, Ian well. He's been working on encampment response all over North America. He's got a huge track record of this stuff. So, we've done some work with communities and that. So we just thought we need to give cities some help to figure out how to do the right thing. And that's exactly what we're doing. This is actually a part of a bigger shift that I'm taking the Alliance through right now. We need to understand where communities are today. As I talk to my team and I say, how do we need to embrace, how do we want to shift to meet the surging homelessness as an organization? I said, you know what? We've got to think like a consulting agency. We need to understand exactly what communities need and give them that thing. We need to innovate like a tech company. Like a good Canadian example, BlackBerry, right? So the BlackBerry was the cell phone.
Oh, it was.
Right? Was. And then along came Apple.
Right.
Well, to this point, we're BlackBerry.
Yeah.
Right? We've brought this new thing. We talked about, housing first. We brought Built for Zero. Communities started getting success. But then Apple, in this case, it's criminalization. In this case, it's that mega whole forced treatment.
Right. The world changed.
The world is changing, and that's changing faster. We need to innovate like a tech company. We need to be much more innovative and change. And we need to think like a political party, think like a marketing agency, and move public opinion with us. We're really kind of reinventing ourselves as an organization so that we can be much more responsive and do things like this encampment response service, give people what they need now in order to put in place the things we know work.
Well, I was impressed. It wasn't just the tactical outreach type stuff, but you're also how to do advocacy in your community. It was an all-inclusive of everything you need to help your community reduce encampments, from the politicians to actually getting people from the encampment to shelter to home.
Credit to Ian. That's a lot of the approach that he's been templating around North America. But, it starts with, helping build the leadership and the governance structure, helping figure out how to enhance your outreach, looking for options in the redesign of your system, walking you through understanding who's in the encampment. As crazy as it seems, resolving encampments and helping people out of encampments isn't a whole lot harder than starting where this conversation started. Go talk to them. Why is it they're not using the shelter system?
Yeah.
What is it they want? What are the housing options? And then give them that.
So you once told me, and I think it's when you were at the Calgary Foundation, there was an iconic homeless man, like, the mayor. He wouldn't go into housing for anything.
Right.
And the issue was because of his friends. And
somebody
finally asked him, "Oh, my friends are here." And then they went and housed them all.
Yeah. There's no silver bullets to ending homelessness. And it is really about relentless problem solving, right? That fella, he was so sick. He was so sick, that poor guy. And I remember he was sat in the park and he was just telling us, I can't go in housing if I can't leave them out here. So we found them all. Yeah. But that's how you solve encampments, right? Yeah. It's, again, putting people back in the driver's seat of their own lives, and it's listening. And that's, again, why Invisible People has been so powerful, because it puts that right in front of us. I've actually sat down with your videos, right, and sat down with team. I've done this for 10 years, right? Show them the video and say, okay, what does Cameron's story tell us? Let's take this apart.
What a powerful story. And I'll put a link to Cameron's video in the description. He was severely addicted to drugs. Yeah. They were sleeping in a dumpster, and it was documented by National Geographic. The garbage truck picked up the dumpster and took it to the dump, and she was never seen again. And this is Fort McMurray. Yeah. This is the Canadian road trip that you got me on. And, what really hit me is I saw myself in him, but I said to myself, he's never going to get sober. And then a couple years later, he's reaching out to me on Facebook. He's like married and got kids. Just amazing, because we're here in Ottawa. And you brought this up. Is Donna. I don't know if you remember Donna. She was an older homeless woman. I interviewed her, and then I went out with the nonprofit that was taking me around, and we were talking, and they said, she's never going to go into housing. And she'd been on the streets of Ottawa for about a year, accessing services. And they said, because all she wants to do is have her RV fixed and go home. And I'm like, okay, how much is that? And they said $400. And I go, well, I'll raise it. I mean, at the time, I literally, didn't have an income myself, but all these people following, I'm going to raise $400. And they're like, oh, no, she's going to need gas and food. And I'm like, well, how much is that? And they said, oh, that's $200.
Yeah.
So 600. How about 800? And I raised $800 almost immediately.
Yeah.
And then there was some back and forth because you just can't give this woman $800. Why not? I've given thousands of dollars directly to homeless people. Anyways, long story short, they were able to get her RV fixed. And last I knew, her and her partner had driven home. They had attached their RV to a friend's thing. They're living with family. Homelessness was ended for 2 people, homeless in Ottawa, for $800. And all you had to do is listen to the person and go, wow, that's not how we normally do things, but let's, have flexible funds or, know.
And it's that flexibility and that responsiveness, right? And it's listening, just talk to people.
Yeah.
The solution becomes apparent through a conversation most of the time.
Is this encampment resolution at the beginning stages, or where you
just started? We're within about 24 hours of announcing it. We had a dozen cities and communities reach out and say, "Oh, please come, give us a hand."
Yeah.
Right. So for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be good uptake.
So back in the day, foundations used to pay me to go in and teach their grantees social media. Yeah. And they would all be in the room. Yeah, we love this. Yeah. And then they never do it, right? Yeah, it's the same thing. They don't have the resources or whatever. Yep. So you guys are doing it, the heavy lifting. That's very impressive.
We can tailor it to what they want us to do, but we'll walk them through it from start to finish.
One of the highlights to me of lived experience programming that I've ever been involved in was you played videos of homeless people before everybody took the stage, especially when the mayor took the stage. He's going up after homeless people in his own city is talking about how they're struggling to survive.
Yeah.
Nobody does that, Tim. What's wrong with you?
Sorry.
It's
this
brilliant.
is where I'm not encumbered by experience.
You've said that twice now. You're going to have to put it on a shirt.
Yeah, unencumbered by experience. Yeah. Well, I'd love to keep doing it, but I was worried I was going to kill you trying to do it every conference.
Well, it's funny that I actually told Alex is that I really didn't want to come here and work. Yeah. Because usually I just sit in a hotel room editing video. And here I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah,
We're just doing podcasts. How can people support you?
I tell people they can do a few things. Give, volunteer, tell a friend. So, you can help us. You can engage at cah.ca, but you can also go online and help your local organizations. They're desperate for support. So Canada Helps is a great resource for going to find your local homeless organizations. Same with volunteering. But tell a friend, get engaged, sign up for our list. We got to build a movement, right? Yeah. And that's just comes down to people engaging the same way that political parties do it. Sign up and we'll be in touch, and you can, send letters to your MPs, organize your friends. Next 6 to 18 months, Canada is going to be in an election, and we're going to need, voters telling all the politicians when they come to the door, we need to solve this. Homelessness is a housing problem. Homelessness is solvable, but we need you, Mr. or Ms. Politician, invest in housing, solve the housing crisis, solve homelessness.
Yeah, we're never going to do anything unless we look at it as a community-wide system.
Right.
I did Invisible People Without Income for 10 years, right? And tiny budget. So I just bought everything on double miles, and then I could travel, right? Yeah. So I went, where can I go? And I almost went to London because we have mutual friends there. And then I went, Finland. Everybody's talking about housing first. Let's go there. And I went to Finland, and what did I learn? And here, I spell neighbor Nabor. I'm not a journalist, right? Yeah. CBC, CNN, Guardian, LA Times, everybody's gone there. And they did the housing first story. And I go there and it's affordable housing. It's not housing first. I mean, housing first is a part of it. We went to Hennepin County, which is another documentary we just did. And we learned it's eviction prevention. It's shelters. It's all of it, right? Instead of fighting the shelters, housing first, and we need to start doing that together. But the first part is the housing part.
One of the ways that I talk about ending homelessness, especially with mayors and with communities, is to say, What would you do if a disaster struck your community? What if a flood came through? I'm from Calgary, and we had a flood come through in 2013, and 77,000 people were forced out of their homes. Well, what happened? Well, you have a disaster management system. You have somebody in charge. You have a command center. You have a plan, a means of coordination. You keep people safe from the emergency, and then you get them back into housing as fast as you can. What does that sound like? That's a community response to homelessness. It is exactly the same as a good disaster response. But like good disaster responses, they're often not perfect. They're often a bit messy, but there's a system. And each government, local governments lead, senior governments come in and support. The focus is on housing. Same thing. Same thing.
I have seen you be the peacekeeper, be the uniter, be the networker with people that I know don't get along with each other, organizations that don't get along with each other, but you get along with all of them.
Yeah.
You get along with me.
Well,
That's a tough one.
I do try.
It's only through the coordination. That's what we saw in Hennepin County. That's what we saw in Finland, is people working together.
Yeah.
But you're natural at this.
Our name is the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Stole it from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. But at the end of the day, to me, alliance is a verb, not a noun. We have to find a way to work with different people within the system. When you look at a community, we keep talking about our clients, like my agency's clients. They're my clients. No, they're our clients as a community. These are our neighbors.
We got to think about it as a community.
These are our neighbors. Last year, we had a partnership with the Industry Association for the commercial real estate and the residential real estate industry, right?
Right.
It's like cats and dogs getting along, but
Right.
but that's key, because ultimately you can't solve homelessness unless you fix the housing system. You can't fix housing system ignoring the biggest players in it.
Yeah.
We have to think about alliance as a verb, not a noun.
I love that.
Right? And we've got to find a way to work together toward a common cause. And I'm single-minded, I'm a man of the mission, and we've got to solve this problem. And so I will work with whoever I need to get there.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for always supporting Invisible People and supporting me personally.
Thank you for doing it. Invisible People has been a big, big part of the movement to end homelessness in Canada, both showing us what's at the heart of ending homelessness, which is the people who are experiencing it, but also, helping, build the movement with your road trip. You've been a huge part of the movement. So thank you.
And I never would have been to Yellowknife if you hadn't arranged all this, right? The road trip. And Yellowknife really changed me many, many ways, in many different ways. The indigenous culture, how people basically perish when they don't have purpose. It was a trip of a lifetime. I just am so grateful, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Yeah. Well, let's do it.